have been interested in that sort of thing. I don't know.
I mean, one guy who was, we just heard the story, Craig Elo, thought he was coming back to Cleveland to coach, and somehow something fell through. But talking about Mark Price and a guy like Elo, would you put Mark Price as the best pure shooter in the history of the Cavaliers?
Yeah, he'd be up at the top of the page. He really was a fantastic shooter, especially considering the fact that he was as short as he was.
Looking forward now, as that era came to a close, and when we went from the likes of Elo and Price to Bobby Sura.
Real quick, I know the injuries, but do you think that one more than the others led to the end of that era? Do you feel that Doherty was the key, or was it Hot Rod Williams? Was there one particular that you thought that's the one they had a hard time dealing with the most?
Yeah, Doherty and Price, when those two became injured and really, lost a step, and Doherty lost a couple of inches in his back after the surgeries. Those were two key factors in the demise of that team.
Tell us a little bit about the Coliseum and how you felt about it.
Oh, I like the Coliseum a lot. It was a very fan-friendly building. The loges were obviously not located where they should have been, but that's what they did. Loges, I don't think, were that important when the building was put together. Now, of course, if you don't have a lot of loges and have them positioned in the best possible location, you're not going to be able to do a lot of big-dollar business. But one of the nice things about the Coliseum is you could come in and walk around that inner concourse and go talk to anybody and everybody in different parts of the building, and that was just fine. Whereas now at the Q, if you want to try and go around and talk to other people, you're probably not going to get it done because you were assigned to your seat and you'd better get there and stay there.
The Coliseum, at the time that the Guns Gateway started up, and plus I think a lot of this tied into Cleveland eventually losing the Browns, Art Modell doing what he did, but at the time, the Coliseum was only, I believe, about 15 or 16 years old. What were your feelings about them moving to downtown Cleveland at that point in time? Because really, the structure wasn't outdated, and they were still drawing very good attendance out there. What were your feelings about the switch and the move back into downtown Cleveland?
Well, the Coliseum lasted 20 years, from 74 to 94, and then, as they say in The Godfather, the city of Cleveland made Gordon Gund a deal he could not refuse. And he came back downtown, and, they built a fabulous building, really impressive, and so it paid off on the one hand, but it did eliminate a lot of people from the outer regions who, A, didn't want to make that long trip into downtown Cleveland, or B, couldn't afford the parking and the tickets once they got there.
And I definitely feel that, I know the Indians were a part of it too, but I really feel that was kind of the real part that stuck in the craw of Art Modell that led to him eventually moving the team. Wasn't so much the Indians, although he did lose his tenant, but it was a team that he felt didn't need a new building, still had a perfectly serviceable building being built, like you said, a palace downtown, and brought back in while they had ignored the Browns. So I kind of think that ended up playing a key role in us eventually losing the Browns for a few years.
Well, I've heard a lot of stories about the whys and the whats and the wherefores on the movement of the Browns, none of which I know are for sure facts because I wasn't involved. But obviously there were things going on behind the scenes that caused Art Modell to make the move that he made.
But as someone who, now obviously you've got nearly 40 years of your life invested, and a large chunk of that here in one city, just as somebody from that aspect, a loyalty and an old school aspect, take the business etiquette out of it, what were your personal feelings about Art Modell moving a franchise like the Browns out of a city with such support?
Well, just looking at it from my own particular standpoint, I didn't really follow the Browns that carefully. I know that, as I said earlier, the Browns really are the reason that the city of Cleveland is such a football town, and so it hurt. And I think it hurt everybody to some degree, perhaps me less than others, because I wasn't vitally involved with the Browns, either working for them or being a fan. So, but I thought it was tough. But I also say that there are probably reasons why it was done, other than just being a meanie and moving the team.
Moving back toward the basketball side of things, when the injuries mounted and the players started departing toward the end of the 80s, moving into the 90s, how much of an impact do you feel Lenny Wilkens' departure had from seeing that franchise being a regular competitor to the struggles we then went through going into the 90s?
The Mike Fratello era.
Well, Lenny Wilkens was an outstanding man and a great coach. I think, quite honestly, he had just about run the course for himself in Cleveland, probably emotionally, because the team that he had that almost won, that didn't win, and then kind of fell apart with all of the injuries. So I think it was time for Lenny to move on. And you mentioned Mike Fratello. I'll say this about Fratello. He got more out of less than any other coach I've ever seen. He would get a team into the playoffs, and there was no reason for them to be in the playoffs, but there they were. And of course, once they got there, they lasted about 5 minutes. But I thought he did a tremendous job with very little talent.
You're absolutely right. That's why he created kind of the style of play that he did. He did a great job of getting the most out of the pieces that he had there. But like you said, the 5 minutes in the playoffs, that's not an exaggeration. They reached that level, and I think a lot of people fear about the Cavaliers now getting stuck in that same level where you go from top of the league, not to the bottom, but to that 8th, 9th playoff spot, that mid of the league where you stay there, but it's hard to move up back to the top or sink back to the bottom.
Yeah, the twilight zone of the NBA.
And it seemed like that's kind of where they were under Mike Fratello, and a lot of things happening during that time. They moved back down to Cleveland. They end up bringing Sean Kemp into Cleveland. Then the lockout happened, and Sean Kemp brought a second person with him in the body of one Sean Kemp. What were your feelings about the signing and then the eventual ballooning of Sean Kemp?
I thought it was a mistake. I did not think that Sean Kemp was going to add anything to the basketball team. Certainly, long term, his track record in other places has not been a good one, and I was proven correct. It was a mistake. A classic mistake. The decision was made by people who didn't know whether the ball was blown up or stuffed.
Now, do you think that a lot of that era right there, not that Mike Fratello didn't get the most out of what he did, but since, first off, you kind of have to be a little more into basketball to see what he was doing, but do you think that era of mediocrity kind of really led to the apathy of the fans towards the Cavs in that late 90s era before the drafting of LeBron James?
Well, if you don't win, they won't come. As I said before, the team didn't win, and therefore people did not come, and couldn't afford to pay the price to watch mediocrity.
What would your thought be, though, Joe, just as a bystander, someone that's been around so long? How come the Cleveland Browns don't have that problem? And they can go 0-16 and sell 70,000 tickets a week, but the Cavs and the Indians, even as good as the Indians were in the 90s, that great run, as soon as it dropped down, again,
they struggled to fill the arena.
The apathy returned, and the Browns somehow are immune to that over the Indians and the Cavs. In my opinion, it's not fair to the Cavs or the Indians. It is what it is. But how do you explain that?
Well, very little in sports and life is fair, so we'll just discount that right now. But this has been a football town. I mean, it always has been a football town. Back in the days when they were playing high school championship games in the stadium before 35 and 40,000 people. This is a football town. Probably always will be a football town, and because of that tradition, it is possible for mediocre teams, and even at times worse than mediocre teams, to carry those fans on, and they only have to play once a week. That is one thing. Plus, the NFL has a great promotional arm where they promote the NFL as the be-all and the end-all of professional sports, and that helps even the teams that don't win.
Do you think a league like the NBA needed to take notes from the NFL on how to market their product?
Well, for one thing, the NBA plays a lot of games. It probably would be better if the NBA played fewer games than they do, and also had fewer teams than they do. But, that's the nature of the beast, and I don't think it's going to change until some of these clubs just fall by the wayside. And I wouldn't be a bit surprised to see some teams fold up and go away in the NBA in the not-too-distant future.
A little bit on that note, because LeBron James made a comment very similar to that regarding his thoughts and opinions regarding lessening the number of teams in the league. What's your take on these super teams that seem to be becoming the norm in the NBA, whereas what you have in Boston with the Big Three, what occurred with LeBron and Chris Bosh going down to Miami, and now all the attempts to move Chris Paul and align him with numerous superstars on one team? How do you feel as a fan seeing these things happen?
Well, first of all, I'm not a fan, but I do think that if that were allowed to continue, you'd end up with about 5 teams with all the top players, and the league would be destroyed. It just would. It would get down to about a 5-6 team league and played in major cities, and that would be certainly the end of the NBA as we know it today.
You mean like Dan Gilbert's letter over the weekend? We should just name 25 of the teams the Washington Generals?
He's right.
That is a very valid point. We've brought that up, especially with basketball returning the last few weeks. That is what you're looking at, and I think, like you said, I'm sure there's some people that think that's a great idea, but for the other 25 cities, they don't. But I can see what you're saying, and I know what you're saying. I read a lot in your book that you don't particularly care for a lot of the things that are in today's NBA that weren't necessarily there before. Through those transitions, the Cavs, they go Lenny Wilkins and Mike Fratello, and then you've got the first lockout, which was in, 97, 98, in that era. Where do you feel, between that and the drafting of LeBron James, was there anything that made you just kind of look around and say, this thing's changing, the league is changing, it's changing into something that perhaps I don't necessarily like?
Oh, it was started long before that. It was started with back in the mid to late 80s when we started to get the dance teams and the fireworks and the half-wit announcers screaming and yelling and the scream team. I think most of those people do need psychiatric help. And it became the people that do that sort of thing, that create that sort of thing, they refer to it as the total entertainment experience. And that's a lot of hogwash as far as I'm concerned, but then again, I'm not in on it, and for a while it really bothered me. I think for a while it really affected my work, and then I began to realize if I continued to let it bother me, I was going to do less than my best work on the air, so I went back, listened to some tapes from before, and kind of regrouped and got back to work the way I used to work, and let all of that other stuff just go by without even thinking about it, or with minimal comment.
I read some of your thoughts on that in your book about the noise, and there has to be something going on at every minute, and I was so amazed to read it from somebody like you, because for years I've gone, and especially the last few years covering the Cavs, being there for every game, sometimes I would go home and go, man, I just wanted to watch a basketball game. There's literally no moment where there's not something happening. It's almost like they're afraid
those elements
that you'll lose the attention. Like, we all have attention deficit disorder, and some people really enjoy. Like, I thought the game of basketball was what they're selling, but I understand that they want to keep up with the entertainment in the other leagues. But I was totally in agreement with you. I just thought at some point too much.
All of it became a distraction.
Well, I think, too, that because they charge such high prices to come see the games, and park so you can see the games, and, of course, for the concessions, the prices they charge, they feel they have to have something to catch the interest of people who come to the games who don't even know how the game is played, but it's a social thing. It's something that that you're supposed to do, or you want to do, or therefore they need all of this extra added attraction to keep people interested. I'm not too sure that's true, but then again, that's what they believe, and they're the ones that are going to do it, so, they can go on and do it, and they'll do it without me.
Joe, you bring up an excellent point, and I want to ask you, do you regret that most major sports now are turning more into a social event than a sporting event? Like Jerry Jones building that palace in Dallas for the Cowboys. It seems less about the football and more about it just being somewhere to go.
Well, that's true. That is very true. That it has become much more of a social activity for a lot of people who are really not sports fans, but they have to have those people show up in order to help pay the freight. And so a lot of people stay home, watch it on TV, and that's the name of that tune. So you just, I say that my feelings is just as the title of a recent very good movie, No Country for Old Men. That's how I